the way this is done is each image I would actually process as a separate image in its own right before doing the mosaic. So I would take all the data for one of the images in the mosaic through luminance, red, green, and blue filters. I would process that as a complete processed LRGB image before I did anything to do with stitching the images together to create the mosaic. Now, you might ask, well, why wouldn't it be easier to do a mosaic of all the red images together in monochrome, and then another mosaic with the green and then with the blue? But if you did that, the reason I don't do that is because there's going to be, as you'll see, you've got to do a lot of adjustments of the brightness, the contrast of each of the images to get them to blend well together, because they're going to be taken at different times under different sky conditions. And if you were to try and do that with the red layer, you'd get a very nice monochrome looking red layer. And then if you did it with the green layer and the blue layer, they'd look great. But if you combine them together, you'd find that the color in each of the areas, each different image is going to be slightly different, because you've stretched each of the red, greens, and blues in the same image section differently to get them to match in their individual mosaics. So I always create the LRGBs as a whole, and then I start to stitch together the mosaic. So in this case, we're going to actually go through the process that I used to create a picture of that wide field mosaic of the cone to the rosette. And so down here in the bottom left, you'll see these are these 10 images that I talked about that I would take and process. And you can see there's individual images in there. You can see they do not, while they're all registered and there's no joins between them at this stage. Look at the different brightnesses that's in each of the images. You can see that's that thing I was talking about having to get each of these images very carefully matched to each other, and why I do it at this stage versus the different color channels. And then I'll take you through the process of lining these up like this. We'll go through how you make those kind of different brightnesses go away. And that's the finished LRGB mosaic you get after that work. And then, because there's a lot of hydrogen alpha in this particular region, I happen to do a hydrogen alpha mosaic, and I did process the hydrogen alpha mosaic as a mosaic in its own right, because of the way I then combine that with the LRGB data. And I thought I would actually show you the way I do a hydrogen alpha combined in this mode, because it's maybe not the typical way that everybody does it. And I find it's actually something that I like to explain to people, because I think you might find that useful for even non-mosaic images. So when you combine the hydrogen alpha with the LRGB, there's the finished result. So we're going to go through exactly how we do this for this particular image now. Now, the one thing that I would ask you to do when you're processing each of your individual LRGB images is to use the same workflow for each one. Follow the same steps, because you're going to get closer brightnesses and contrast adjustments, contrast between each of the individual images if you follow the same processing steps for each of the images. They're not going to be identical. There's always going to be some adjustment. But if you use a widely different process between processing one image and the next, it's going to make your end combination project that much harder. So try and stick with the same process and workflow for each of the images. For me, I do all of my calibration in CCD Stack. The key software, and I'm going to show you this software in some detail, that I use to register all the images, which is key to building a mosaic, is a piece of software called Registar. Now, there are other pieces of software out there that do that now. There's a piece of software I was about to look into myself, but haven't done yet, called Astro Pixel Processor. And that also has a mosaic capability. But I use this software called Registar. It's relatively cheap, quite basic, but it does a fantastic job of registration. And for me, that was what enabled me to really get going with mosaics. I had tried image registration in different packages. I tried MaximDL. I tried Images Plus, and I couldn't get registration to be nailed on 100% of the time, especially with things like narrowband images like hydrogen alpha. And this process really this software really enabled that. The other thing that I use then is I do my outlier pixel rejection to get rid of satellites, trails, plane streaks, etc. with the statistical rejection and CCD stack, and then I'll just create an averaged image as you're probably all familiar with. But then I do the whole rest of my process typically is in Photoshop. I have not used PixInsight. I know that's another great program. I know a lot of you will be using that. I think some of the techniques that I talk about here translate well to PixInsight, but I have not used it. So I will be showing you how I do this in Photoshop. I think last time I gave this presentation, I was told I was a bit old school, but it works for me. And if PixInsight works for you, that's great. I just happen to use this and I've stuck with it. So I'll go through levels and curves with the image. I'll use gradient removal using Russell Cromer's gradient exterminator. I'll then do some further contrast enhancements. I'll use sharpening with unsharp masks and high pass filters. I'll take my H alpha through HDR toning in Photoshop to get an even better high definition image. And I'll do noise reduction with Noise Ninja. I'm not going to go through that process here because I think the interesting bit is how to take single images that you're familiar with and how to do, and then how do you make the mosaic itself. So what's the best process to do this? And there's a couple of ways that that you could do it. And the way that I'd read about originally was, well, you could take a low resolution image, a very big wide field image of the area of the sky you're going to look at. Maybe it's a DSLR image, but something wide field, very wide field, lower resolution that you're going to end up doing. Scale that image up and use that as the master image to align all your high resolution images to. But I didn't really have a good way of doing that at the time, so I invented what I would have called an iterative approach. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to take two images and we're going to register them together to make a 2-image mosaic and blend them together to form a final 2-image mosaic. And then we're going to add a third image to that. And then we're going to repeat that process. And then you can add a fourth and a fifth, and you can just keep going iteratively until it's done. So you don't absolutely have to go and take a kind of lower resolution image to register everything to. An iterative approach works really well for most images, and it's worked very well for me. So let's talk about how we might do that. So here's what Registar looks like. We're now looking in the registration software, because it's going to be the key vehicle that I show you for being able to get images that were taken with this 20% overlap and then align them and allow them to be easily imported into Photoshop, which then lets you easily blend them together. So basically what I've got in this screen here, on the right-hand side is a single image of the Rosette Nebula. On the left-hand side is a single image of what's to the left-hand side of this image here. And if you look carefully, you can just about see that there's some stars that are overlapped here. That star's overlapped there, that's there. And we want to join those two images together, register the overlap precisely. So what we do is we bring up this registration control window, and we've selected, in this case, the left-hand image, and we're going to register it to the Rosette image over here, which is fully processed. And I'm going to click this little union thing here, which says I want to create a union of these two images. I want you to register it, and I want you to create an image that's as big as both images combined. That's what the union option does. And then you hit register. It really is as simple as that, leaving everything else defaulted. And what happens is you get this. So what this is showing you is this red image is the left-hand image. You can see it's overlapped here in this kind of shaded area between the two. There's the right-hand Rosette image. It's worked out the registration exactly just using these overlapped areas. And now we've got an image that is in size the union of these two images. And in this case, I've got the left image, and what you can't tell until you save this image is over here, when you import it into Photoshop, where the Rosette is, it's all padded with black. So you've got all this image, and then you've got black padding over here. If you save this and import it into Photoshop, that's what it would look like. So we've got our left-hand image registered. But now what we need to do is we need to go to the rosette image, and we need to now make it as big as this union we just created of these two images. And so to do that, Registar has this little thing called the crop pad control. So I select my rosette image. It will automatically have picked that I wanted to do something with the other image in here, which is the rosette left image. And I create my union again, and I hit OK. And what that will then do is it will create a single image here with the rosette cropped or padded out in this case to be the same size as this one we created earlier. And now the black padding will be to the left of the rosette nebula. Here it was to the right of the left-hand image. So now I've got two images exactly registered, exactly the same size, that I can save and import into Photoshop. So save them as TIFFs, and away you go into Photoshop at this stage. So what you see here is when I've opened Photoshop up, and I'm going to presume that you know a little bit about Photoshop. I'm not going to go into a lot of details as to how it works, but what you do in this case is you've imported both images. You would select one. In this case, I selected the rosette image with its black padding to the left. You can see the black padding over here. I selected it, I copied it, and then I pasted it into the image that contained the left image with the padding to the right. And I've got two layers in this image now. I've got the layer that you see here with the rosette image, and underneath it, this background layer, you could actually, if you were able to see into that little box, there's the left-hand image underneath this layer one. So now I want to let the left-hand image show through so I can start to do some blending. So what I do is I did a little selection box, a rectangular selection through Photoshop over the black padding area, and I cut the pixels. And when you cut the pixels, once you've selected that area, oh, like magic, there you can see now the left-hand image is shining through into the main view. Now we still have this, obviously, this black piece here that I didn't cut away, because what I want to do now is I want to create a seamless blend between these two images. So how would you go about doing that? Well, the way to do that in Photoshop is to create a mask. And I know that PixInsight, for example, also has masks, so you can do the same approach there. What you do is you create the mask. In this case, I'm going to create a mask over the rosette image, and I'm going to have a mask that lets everything still be revealed. So that's what this little white box is here. It's the reveal all mask. And then what I can do is I can take a paintbrush from over here. I'll take select the paintbrush icon from the palette here, and then I can paint on the image. I would paint black, but I'm doing it while I've got this mask selected. So when I paint black in this point here, it's actually going to obscure bits, this black strip and this bit from the rosette image, and let show through this left-hand image, which is overlapping. So when you paint over that join, it looks like this. I've now painted over that join. And if you look in here, that little black strip is where I painted. That black strip is obscuring the rosette image. And now I've got the seamless join. Well, not quite seamless yet, but there's no black strip. But look what you've got, right? Now you can see what the difficulty is now we're going to have to work on. These images are not quite identical in terms of their brightness and their contrast. And in some cases, their color as well is different. So we're going to have to do a piece of work now in the Photoshop, and it's going to be manual and it's going to be subjective. There's a lot of subjectivity to this until you feel it looks right. So what's the first thing that we can see that's wrong with these two images? Well, the first thing is this image on the left-hand side, it's too bright. The background is much brighter than the background in the rosette. So we need to deal with that. So the way to deal with that in Photoshop is to go into the curves function and correct that. So we select the background image, which is actually the left-hand image of the two. and we'll use the curves function to drop the background down a little bit. And you can see here, that looks a bit closer, starting to look a little bit better now. It's a bit more evenly matched. So we'll okay that, and then we'll move on to what's next. Now, if we look at what's next, if you look at this upper right-hand region, that's brighter here than it is there. So we might want to go and correct that. So the way we do that is we'll draw a selection around the area that we now want to operate on. And we're still selected on the left-hand image underneath. And so this curves function I'm going to do now is going to work on this bit of the image here, and I'm going to make it a bit brighter to match the image on the right. Now, I could have done it the other way around. I could have selected the rosette image and made this area a bit darker. Again, it's all subjective and how you think what's best for the image itself. But we needed to do something on one of those two images, and I chose to do brighten the left-hand one in this little region here that's selected. So with that curve function, you can see it starts to look a bit more seamless. But now as well, you can see that the lower right region of the left-hand image is a bit brighter still than the left hand of the image to the right. So we're going to go and correct that now. Same technique. Again, we select the area we want to operate on the left-hand image, and we bring down the background a little bit more so it's a bit more seamless. And now it's starting to look a bit more like there isn't any join or differences, and it truly is a single image. Now, just subtly in this case, it was looking like there was a slight color adjustment between the two images. It probably doesn't show through very well on the slide, but what was done here is to adjust the color background in the green channel again on the left-hand image, just so the color balance looked a little bit more even between the two. And just tweaking the green channel on the left-hand image was enough to do that. Finally, there was a bit more brightness in this right-hand image in the center region. And so again, selection round here of what I want to do. And now I'm selected on the Rosette Nebula this time, and I'm going to darken this part here so that it's a bit more reasonable. Again, pulling down on the curves, and now it starts to look more reasonable. And so there you are, two images, pretty well blended. I would argue, now I've done a lot more of these mosaics. I would argue I could have gone further because I still think it looks a bit too bright out here, but it's not bad at this stage. And so what you would do is flatten this image down to make one image out of the two, and you save this as a single image as a TIFF file. And so we've got our two-image mosaic, and now we're going to iterate. So iteration, back into Registar. Now I've imported my two-image mosaic that I just created. That's this one down here. And I've got this new single image, which is called Rosette Upper. So it's an image taken above the Rosette Nebula. I've kind of lined it up so you can kind of see how that goes, but we need to register these two images together exactly and create an image that's as big as all three of these images now. So again, we use the registration. We've selected the Rosette Upper. We select this the Rosette bottom row that we created earlier, and we use that union command again. I'm going to create a union of this image with the two-image mosaic, and we're going to let Registar do that. And away it goes again. And now we've got our third image registered with the two-image mosaic. This time it's all a union that's a big square like this. When we import this into Photoshop, all this will be black around the image we just registered. It will be padded out. But now we need to go back to our two-image mosaic, and we need to make that padded to be the same size as the three-image one we just created. So we go back to the two-image one, we go to the crop pad function, we do the union command again, and we've now made this image the same size as the three-image mosaic that we just created with the previous register command. So again, I've got two images, absolutely identical in terms of their size, all aligned correctly. I can import those two images into Photoshop, and I can blend that new single image with the two-image mosaic. And you just keep going through this process every time you add an image. It sounds like it's a lot when you take it in for the first time, But when you get proficient at this, I can do a 6-image mosaic in about 30 minutes. When you really get familiar with the commands, get familiar with the areas you have to tweak in terms of the brightnesses and the color contrast, it really you can get very quick at it with a bit of practice and experience. So that's how you would iterate to create that. So there you go. You do 10 of those images. That's your LRGB mosaic. Now, as it happens, we still have to do our hydrogen alpha mosaic, but now we've got a slight easier way of doing it, because I can use my LRGB mosaic as my registration master for each of my individual mosaic images for the hydrogen alpha. So I can just register them all using this time the match option rather than the union option in Registar to register them up. And now it will just create 10 images straight away that are all the same size as this, with each image in exactly the right position, with padding black around the areas that are not relevant from that image, but needed to match up to the same image size as the ones that were taken elsewhere in the sky. So you just go through this process of blending those images together again, and you get your 10 image H alpha. It's a quicker registration process now.